Imagine being alone in a remote cabin, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the howling wind, when suddenly, a knock echoes through the silence. At first, you think it's the wind, until the knocking turns to scratching, and then a shadow moves across the floor, even though no one is there. The wind howled through the dense forest, twisting the skeletal branches of the trees like grasping fingers. Deep within the woods, a lone cabin stood, its wooden structure groaning against the force of the wind. The night was darker than usual, as if the moon itself had turned its back on the world. Inside the cabin, Ethan sat by the fireplace, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The flames flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows across the room. Ethan had taken this trip for solitude, a much-needed escape from the chaos of the city. His friends had warned him about this place. A sudden knock at the door made him freeze. It was sharp, deliberate. Not the wind, not an animal. Someone was out there. He hesitated, staring at the door as silence stretched between the knocks. His breath came shallow. Then, another knock, louder this time. Against his better judgment, he stood up and approached the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Who's there?" His voice came out weak, barely above a whisper. No answer. Only the wind, rustling through the trees. He exhaled and took a step back, shaking his head. Probably just his mind playing tricks on him. He turned away, but then thud. The door shuddered as if something heavy had slammed against it. A chill ran down his spine. He backed away slowly, reaching for the fireplace poker. The room felt colder, the fire struggling to stay alive. The knocking stopped, replaced by a faint scratching sound, something clawing at the wood. Ethan's stomach twisted. He took slow steps backward, his gaze locked on the door. And then, silence. Deafening, unnatural silence. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The fire flickered again, nearly going out, and in that brief moment of darkness, he saw it, a shadow slithering across the floor, stretching unnaturally long. His breath caught. His grip tightened on the poker. The shadow moved, creeping toward him, but there was no one there. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone, but the screen was black, dead. A cold, sharp breath ghosted against his neck. His body stiffened, his blood turned to ice. He spun around, swinging the poker wildly, but there was nothing, just the whisper of the wind outside. He forced himself to take slow breaths. His mind was playing tricks on him. That's all this was. Isolation messing with his head. He needed sleep. Ignoring the gnawing fear clawing at his chest, he stumbled toward the bedroom. He closed the door behind him, locked it, and leaned against it. He just needed to make it to morning. But as he turned toward the bed, his stomach lurched. The sheets were pulled back, twisted as if someone had just been lying there. He hadn't touched them. A chill crawled up his spine. Then he noticed something, footprints, wet and glistening in the moonlight. The prints led from the bed to where he stood. His breath hitched. His body refused to move. The prints ended right at his feet. A whisper slithered through the air, a voice that wasn't his own. "You shouldn't have come." The door behind him slammed open, and something cold wrapped around his wrist. Yanking him back with inhuman strength, he thrashed, his screams strangled in his throat. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was his own shadow stretching impossibly long, twisting into something that wasn't his own. Then, silence. The fire in the other room sputtered out. The wind outside ceased, and in the darkness, something new breathed.